I had it shooting in the stove. Come
here. The suspect in Wednesday's fatal shooting at an Atlanta McDonald's remains in jail this morning and is being held without bond.
The week between Christmas and New Year's is usually a time of celebration. But on December 27, 2023, the atmosphere inside the McDonald's on Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard in Atlanta was anything but festive. Taniyah Evans, only 19 years old, arrived at the restaurant with her two sisters, fueled by a specific and escalating grievance. They claimed that their food order was incorrect and that items were missing from their bag. The sisters didn't just want a refund, they wanted a confrontation. Standing behind the counter was a female employee who became the target of their verbal abuse. As the argument grew louder and more aggressive, the sisters' behavior began to draw the attention of everyone in the busy West End establishment. Among the onlookers was 30-year-old Tamika Woods, known affectionately as Nai by her friends and family. Tamika wasn't an employee, she was simply there to support her friend who was working behind the counter. Sensing that the situation was becoming dangerous, Tamika stepped forward to intervene, hoping to de-escalate the hostility and protect her friend from the trio of angry sisters.
What Tamika Woods and the other customers didn't know was that Taniyah Evans was not just angry, she was armed. Concealed in her waistband was a handgun that police later discovered had been stolen from a vehicle in a parking garage just 5 miles away. As Tamika stepped in to defend her friend, the verbal sparring turned physical. One of Taniyah's sisters reportedly engaged in a scuffle, and the restaurant became a scene of absolute chaos. In a moment of chilling clarity captured on surveillance video, Taniyah Evans reached for the stolen firearm. She didn't hesitate or fire a warning shot. She walked toward Tamika Woods and fired a single round directly into her chest. The sound of the gunshot silenced the screaming and sent the entire restaurant into a panic. Tamika, a mother of 4 who had only stepped in to help a friend, collapsed to the floor as the life began to drain from her. The minor dispute over a few pieces of fast food had instantly transformed into a capital crime, executed with a weapon that should never have been in Taniyah's hands. As the smoke cleared and Tamika Woods lay dying on the floor, Taniyah Evans turned to flee the scene. She headed for the exit, likely hoping to disappear into the busy Atlanta streets. However, she didn't count on the bravery of the bystanders. Before she could reach the door, a male customer who had witnessed the shooting lunged at her. He managed to tackle the 19-year-old to the ground and pinned her down, risking his own life to ensure the killer didn't escape. Other witnesses called 911, and the dispatcher received frantic reports of a woman shot in the heart. Atlanta Zone 4 officers arrived at the scene at 2:42 p.m. to find a chaotic mix of people performing CPR on Tamika and a crowd holding Evans in place. Paramedics rushed Tamika to the hospital, but the single bullet had done irreparable damage. The 30-year-old mother was pronounced dead, leaving 4 children without their parent over a disagreement she hadn't even started. Evans was handcuffed and led away, her transition from a teenager with a food complaint to a murder suspect complete.
Once at the police station, Taniyah Evans was taken into an interrogation room. When detectives informed her that Tamika Woods had passed away, Evans reportedly showed very little emotion. She didn't express remorse or claim self-defense. Instead, she remained stoic, eventually asking for a lawyer and ending the interview. The investigation quickly shifted to the firearm she had used. The discovery that the gun was stolen highlighted a major issue in Atlanta: the thousands of firearms stolen from cars every year that end up in the hands of young, impulsive individuals. Evans was booked into the Fulton County Jail on a litany of charges, including felony murder, aggravated assault, and theft by receiving stolen property. At her bond hearing 2 days later, The judge, citing the extreme danger she posed to the community, denied her bond entirely. She was forced to wait behind bars as the legal system began the slow process of seeking justice for Tamika's children. The escalating dispute that Atlanta police frequently warned the public about had claimed another innocent life in a most public and brutal way. For nearly a year, the case of Tania Evans moved through the Fulton County court system. Facing a potential life sentence for felony murder, Evans and her legal team eventually entered into negotiations with the prosecution. In a move that sparked debate among the victim's family, a deal was reached. Evans agreed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, aggravated assault, and the firearms charges in exchange for the murder charge being dropped. On November 19, 2024, nearly a year after the shooting, 20-year-old Tania Evans stood before a judge for sentencing. She was handed 25 years in prison, a sentence that ensures she will spend the majority of her youth behind bars. She will be in her mid-40s before she even becomes eligible for release. Tamika Wood's family was left with a heavy sense of loss, struggling to reconcile a 25-year sentence with the permanent absence of a devoted mother. The case remains a tragic example of how the combination of a stolen gun and a trivial argument can destroy two families in a single impulsive moment at a neighborhood McDonald's.
Police say a McDonald's employee was shot by the son of a customer who was served cold French fries.
This wasn't the first attack on a fast food employee this year, and some are concerned about workplace safety in the city.
The evening of August 1st, 2022 seemed like any other hot summer night outside a McDonald's on Fulton Street in Brooklyn, New York. Inside, 40-year-old Lisa Fulmore was ordering food, but when she received her order, she noticed the French fries were cold. Fulmore went to the counter to complain to the staff, including 23-year-old employee Matthew Webb. According to reports, the interaction grew tense, and some of the workers allegedly laughed at the complaint. What turned this minor customer grievance into a deadly situation was the phone in Fulmore's hand. She was on a live FaceTime call with her 20-year-old son, Michael Morgan. Morgan sat on the other end of the line, listening to his mother argue with the fast food workers in real time. Hearing the laughter and his mother's frustration, Morgan's temper flared. He told his mother he had to do what he had to do, hung up the phone, and immediately headed toward the restaurant to confront the employees himself. Michael Morgan arrived at the McDonald's accompanied by his 18-year-old girlfriend, Camelia Dunlap. Morgan was no stranger to confrontation. At just 20 years old, he already had 13 prior arrests on his record, including charges for assault and theft. As Morgan entered the restaurant, the argument with Matthew Webb spilled out of the lobby and onto the busy Brooklyn sidewalk. Surveillance cameras caught the rapid escalation. Morgan threw a heavy punch that knocked Webb flat onto the concrete. As the 23-year-old employee tried to push himself back up, Morgan reached for a handgun that Dunlap had allegedly carried to the scene for him. Without hesitation, Morgan leveled the weapon and fired a single shot directly into Webb's neck. The young worker collapsed back onto the pavement, bleeding profusely. While horrified bystanders rushed over, one man cradling Webb's head and another pressing a shirt against the wound, Morgan and Dunlap turned and fled into the night. Matthew Webb was rushed to Brookdale University Hospital in critical condition. Doctors delivered the devastating news to his family that the young man was brain dead and only being kept alive by life support machines. Meanwhile, the NYPD acted swiftly. Reviewing the surveillance footage, they tracked Morgan to his home and arrested both him and Camelia Dunlap that same night. While detectives were questioning Morgan about the shooting over the cold fries, the interrogation took a bizarre turn. Caught in the pressure of the moment, Morgan began talking about an entirely different crime. He unexpectedly confessed to the unsolved October 2020 murder of 28-year-old Kevin Holloman, who had been shot dead just 6 blocks away. Holloman hadn't even been the intended target. Morgan had been trying to kill Holloman's cousin over a neighborhood dispute.
By trying to defend his mother over a side of fries, Morgan had walked himself right into a double murder charge.
On August 5th, 2022, Matthew Webb's family made the agonizing decision to remove him from life support, and he passed away from his injuries. Following his death, the Kings County District Attorney's Office officially upgraded the charges against Michael Morgan to murder, alongside his existing murder charge for the 2020 killing of Kevin Holloman. Camelia Dunlap was also indicted for her role in handing Morgan the firearm and helping him conceal it after the shooting. Morgan was held in custody without bail at his arraignment, with prosecutors painting a picture of an incredibly volatile individual who posed a lethal threat to the public. The defense faced an impossible task, as Morgan had been caught on camera committing the assault and had voluntarily confessed to a completely separate homicide while in the interrogation room. The case drew massive national media attention, becoming a terrifying example of how hair-trigger tempers can turn a routine fast food run fatal.
The legal process culminated in a unique judicial decision. In December 2023, a Kings County judge ruled that rather than splitting the complex cases, Michael Morgan and Camelia Dunlap would be tried together in the same courtroom, but using simultaneous, separate juries to hear the evidence. For Matthew Webb's family, the trial was a painful reminder of a young life stolen over a $3 order of French fries. Webb was remembered by his colleagues as a hard worker who didn't deserve to face lethal violence on a routine shift. As the legal proceedings move forward, the 20-year-old Morgan faces the very real prospect of spending the rest of his natural life behind bars without the possibility of parole for 2 separate killings. The case stands as a somber warning about the devastating intersection of illegal firearms, street violence, and a total lack of impulse control, leaving a Brooklyn community to wonder how cold fries could ever cost a young man his life. On the afternoon of July 26, 2022, a 67-year-old resident of Dewey, Arizona, walked into a Wendy's in Prescott Valley for a simple meal. He ordered his food and a Frosty, but when he received the items, something was wrong. The man returned to the service counter to voice his complaint, standing there calmly while sipping his drink. Behind the register was 35-year-old employee Antoine Kendrick. Surveillance footage from that day shows a brief verbal exchange between the two men. While the customer appeared focused on his order, Kendrick's internal fuse was rapidly shortening. There was no shouting match, no physical threat from the elderly man, and no indication that the situation was about to turn violent. The customer simply wanted his order corrected, a routine part of any service job. However, Kendrick's reaction was anything but routine. As the customer took a sip of his Frosty and looked away, he had no idea that the man behind the counter was no longer thinking about customer service, but about physical retaliation for the minor inconvenience of a food complaint. The moment captured on the restaurant's security camera remains one of the most shocking instances of workplace aggression. Without any physical provocation, Antoine Kendrick walked out from behind the counter and approached the unsuspecting 67-year-old from the side. As the man continued to sip his Frosty, Kendrick swung his arm with full force, landing a devastating punch directly to the side of the man's head. The impact was so severe that the victim collapsed instantly, falling like a weight to the tile floor. His head struck the hard pavement with a sickening thud, causing immediate and massive trauma. Kendrick did not offer assistance or express regret. He simply looked at the fallen man before retreating. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted from a quiet lunch hour to a medical emergency. Witnesses and fellow employees watched in horror as the customer lay motionless on the floor, unresponsive to any attempts to wake him. The ice killer equivalent in the fast food world had struck, turning a simple complaint into a potential homicide in a matter of seconds. Emergency responders from the Prescott Valley Police Department and the Central Arizona Fire and Medical Authority arrived at the Wendy's at 4:40 p.m.
They found the elderly victim in critical condition, suffering from what was clearly a life-threatening brain injury. Realizing that the local facilities were not equipped to handle trauma of this magnitude, the decision was made to airlift the man to a specialized hospital in the Phoenix area. As the helicopter took off, police took Antoine Kendrick into custody. Initially, he was charged with aggravated assault as the victim was still fighting for his life. For 10 agonizing days, the victim remained in a coma, never regaining consciousness. His family waited by his bedside, hoping for a miracle that would never come. On August 5, 2022, the 67-year-old man succumbed to his injuries. The single impulsive punch thrown by Kendrick over a Frosty complaint had officially become a murder investigation, leaving a small Arizona community struggling to understand how such a mundane interaction could end in a senseless death.
Following the victim's death, the Prescott Valley Police Department officially upgraded the charges against Antoine Kendrick to second-degree murder. The legal proceedings in Yavapai County Superior Court focused heavily on the surveillance footage, which left no doubt that the attack was unprovoked and excessive. Kendrick's history and temperament became central points of discussion as prosecutors argued that his actions showed a total disregard for human life. He was held in custody without bond for the duration of the pretrial phase. The victim's name was withheld from the public for privacy reasons, but the impact of his death was felt deeply by the Dewey community. Kendrick initially entered a plea of not guilty, but as the evidence mounted, his legal strategy shifted. The brutality of the video, showing a young, fit man blindsiding a defenseless senior citizen, was a hurdle that the defense could not easily overcome. Kendrick sat in jail for over 600 days, waiting for his day in court, while the reality of his long-term imprisonment began to settle in.
Stay sharp and stay safe. Subscribe now for more chilling true crime deep dives.
Macon's family shares their grief. She was shot and killed at a Subway restaurant Sunday night over too much mayo.
Able to catch this person that did this to my cousin. Because so many cases nowadays keep going because they can't never find the person who did it. And above for just seeing favor from our family so we could get justice.
Jail records we obtained.
On a quiet Sunday night in June 2022, the subway inside a Circle K gas station in downtown Atlanta became the setting for an unthinkable tragedy. 26-year-old Brittany Macon had only been working at the restaurant for 3 weeks alongside her girlfriend and co-worker, 24-year-old Jada Statham. The night took a dark turn when 36-year-old Melvin Williams walked in and ordered a sandwich. Williams was not a typical customer. He was a convicted felon with a lengthy criminal record, including 8 previous stints in the Fulton County Jail. Despite being out on bond for a previous assault and under strict court orders not to possess any weapons, he was secretly armed. The situation escalated instantly over a staggering triviality. Williams believed there was too much mayonnaise on his sandwich. He began an aggressive verbal assault on the 2 women behind the counter. What should have been a simple request to remaking a meal transformed into a volatile confrontation. As Williams' rage intensified, the small restaurant space felt increasingly claustrophobic, with the argument reaching a point of no return over a condiment that cost the establishment mere pennies.
As the argument over the mayonnaise reached its peak, Melvin Williams decided that words were no longer sufficient to settle his grievance. In a cold-blooded move that shocked bystanders, he pulled a handgun from his person and opened fire on the 2 defenseless women behind the counter. The sound of gunshots filled the gas station as bullets tore through the service area. Brittany Macon was struck multiple times and collapsed. Her injuries were fatal. Jada Statham was also hit twice, but in an act of incredible maternal instinct, she managed to push her 5-year-old son, who was visiting her at work, underneath the counter to shield him from the flying lead.
The young boy crouched in the darkness, listening to the screams and the thunder of the firearm. An on-duty manager attempted to intervene by firing back at Williams, but the shooter managed to dodge the rounds and fled into the night. Within seconds, a routine Sunday shift had turned into a bloodbath, leaving one woman dead, another wounded, and a young child permanently traumatized by a sandwich dispute.
The manhunt for Melvin Williams didn't last long, as his face was clearly captured on the Circle K's high-definition surveillance cameras. Police arrested him the very next day, June 27, 2022. As detectives dug into his background, the true failure of the legal system became apparent. Williams had been in and out of the justice system for over a decade. In 2013, he had pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and burglary, but had his record effectively wiped clean under Georgia's First Offender Act in 2019. By 2021, he was back in trouble for cruelty to children and assault against his child's mother. He was literally out on bond for those violent charges when he walked into the subway with a gun. This history of recidivism fueled public outrage, as many questioned why a man with such a violent track record was free to roam the streets with a firearm. Williams was booked into the Fulton County Jail yet again, but this time the charges were far more severe: murder, felony murder, and multiple counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
During the legal proceedings, the most heartbreaking detail of the case remained the presence of Jada Stathem's 5-year-old son. Prosecutors highlighted the cruelty to children charge, noting that the boy had been forced to witness his mother being shot and his mother's partner being killed. Jada, recovering from her physical wounds, became a central figure in the push for justice. In November 2023, more than a year after the shooting, Williams attempted to petition the court for bond once again. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. A Fulton County judge denied the request for the second time, explicitly stating that Williams posed a significant risk of committing further felonies if released. The court noted his blatant disregard for previous bond conditions, specifically his decision to carry a weapon while prohibited. Williams was returned to his cell to wait for a trial date, his silence in the face of the evidence reflecting the same cold detachment he showed the night he pulled the trigger over a sandwich topping.
The Subway Mayonnaise shooting remains one of the most cited examples of senseless workplace violence in American history. Brittany Macon's family was left to mourn a young woman who was simply trying to build a life and a career. The Circle K location became a grim landmark in downtown Atlanta, a reminder of how quickly domestic peace can be shattered. The case sparked national conversations about the Mayonnaise murder and the absurdity of the motives behind modern homicides. For Jada Statham and her son, the emotional scars are permanent. The boy must grow up with the memory of the night he hid under a counter while a man took a life over a minor food error. As of 2026, Melvin Williams remains behind bars in the Fulton County Jail, facing a potential life sentence without the possibility of parole. The case serves as a somber warning to society about the intersection of illegal firearm possession and hair-trigger tempers. Brittany's life was worth infinitely more than a sandwich, yet she became a victim of a man who couldn't see the difference.
Police arrested suspect in connection with a deadly double shooting. This was at a Spanish Lake Steak and Shake drive-thru. Meanwhile,
the night of April 8th, 2026 began like any other shift at the Steak and Shake on Bellefontaine Road in Spanish Lake, Missouri. Inside, 32-year-old Shancia Meekins was working hard, balancing 2 jobs to build a better life for herself. Known for her kind heart and tireless work ethic, Shancia was the backbone of her family. Around 11:35 p.m., the peaceful routine was shattered when a white SUV pulled into the drive-thru lane. Behind the wheel was 20-year-old Jada Bell. The interaction started over a trivial detail, a missing second order of onion rings. What should have been a simple customer service correction quickly spiraled into a heated verbal altercation.
Jada Bell, fueled by an inexplicable and disproportionate rage, began screaming at the staff through the window. Shansia, trying to handle the situation, found herself in the crosshairs of a conflict that was no longer about food. As the tension reached a boiling point, the atmosphere grew thick with hostility. Bystanders and co-workers watched as the minor dispute over a side dish transformed into a volatile confrontation, setting the stage for a senseless act of violence that would change multiple lives forever.
The argument intensified when Jada Bell reached for her drink and hurled it directly at Shansia through the open drive-thru window. In the heat of the moment, Shansia reportedly threw the drink back, a split-second reaction to the assault. This was the moment Jada Bell chose to escalate the situation from a petty dispute to a deadly crime. Instead of driving away, Bell reached for a firearm. Without hesitation, she leveled the gun and fired multiple rounds directly through the window into the restaurant. The sound of shattering glass and gunfire erupted in the small service area. Shansia Meekins was struck and collapsed instantly. A male coworker standing nearby was also hit in the hand as bullets sprayed the interior of the kitchen. Chaos ensued as employees scrambled for cover, and the white SUV sped off into the night, leaving behind a horrific scene of blood and broken glass. Shansia, a woman who had spent her life helping others, was pronounced dead at the scene. 8 shots had been fired, all over a bag of fast food that cost less than $5, leaving the community in a state of absolute shock and mourning.
As the Spanish Lake community reeled from the loss of Shansia, the St. Louis County Police Department began a meticulous investigation. They had the surveillance footage showing the white SUV and the cold-blooded shooting, but the driver's identity remained a mystery. For 12 days, Shansia's mother, Tamila Washington, pleaded for justice, unable to comprehend how a life could be taken over onion rings. Detectives worked around the clock, utilizing every technological tool at their disposal. They eventually caught a break by cross-referencing the surveillance timing with cell tower pings in the Spanish Lake area. The digital breadcrumbs led them straight to Jada Bell. While Bell believed she had escaped into the anonymity of the city, the forensic net was closing in. Detectives tracked her movements leading up to and following the shooting, building a timeline that placed her exactly at the Steak and Shake window at 11:35 p.m. The pressure mounted as the public demanded an arrest for the drive-thru killer. Finally, on April 20th, 2026, the investigation reached its climax. Police moved in to apprehend the suspect, ending a nearly 2-week period of fear and uncertainty for the victims' families and the local workforce.
Jada Bell was taken into custody without incident and transported to the St. Louis County Jail. The charges brought against her were staggering, reflecting the brutality of her actions. First-degree murder, first-degree assault, unlawful use of a weapon, and 3 counts of armed criminal action. A judge set her bond at a massive $1 million cash only, ensuring she would remain behind bars as the legal process moved forward. During questioning, Bell reportedly remained silent, offering no apology or explanation for the violence she unleashed. In the courtroom, the gravity of the case was felt by everyone present. Shansia's family, led by her cousin Anthony Wilhite, spoke out about the need for the ultimate penalty, arguing that the death penalty was necessary to send a message that such disregard for human life would not be tolerated. The prosecuting attorney, Melissa Price Smith, noted that her office would follow a strict formal process to decide whether to seek the death penalty. Meanwhile, the male co-worker who survived the shooting faced the long road of physical and emotional recovery, haunted by the memory of the night a simple shift turned into a literal battlefield over a side order.
The tragedy of Shansia Meekins is a haunting reminder of the fragility of life in the face of unchecked aggression. Shansia would have turned 33 years old just 15 days after the shooting, a milestone her family had to mark with a funeral instead of a celebration. Her father, Chanty Meekins, mourned the loss of his only baby, while her twin brother faced a future without his closest companion. The Steak and Shake on Bellefontaine Road eventually repaired its shattered window, but the psychological scars on the staff remained. This case stands as one of the most prominent examples of fast food rage, a phenomenon that highlights a disturbing lack of empathy in modern society. Jada Bell, at only 20 years old, traded her entire future for a moment of perceived retribution over onion rings. She remains in custody, facing a potential lifetime in prison or the death penalty. The legacy of this case is a somber call for patience and humanity in daily interactions. Shansia's mother still asks the question that no one can truly answer. Who kills somebody over onion rings? The silence in response is the most tragic part of the entire story.
Versus Elijah Mackey.
Deputies say this man, 23-year-old Elijah Mackey, is the Checkers worker who shot and killed a customer over a food order. He showed no emotion during his first appearance this afternoon, charged with the murder of Wesley Robertson.
The night of May 21st, 2025 started as a routine Wednesday at the Checkers fast food restaurant on West Erlo Bronson Memorial Highway in Kissimmee, Florida. Located near the high-traffic Old Town Entertainment District, the restaurant was a popular spot for both tourists and locals. Inside, 23-year-old Elijah Mackey was working the drive-thru window, handling the late-night rush of orders. Outside, at the walk-up service window, a customer named Wesley Robertson had just received his food. Robertson noticed that his order was incorrect, specifically claiming that several mayonnaise packets he had requested were missing from the bag. He began a verbal dispute with a female employee at the window, growing increasingly frustrated and repeatedly asking to speak with a manager to resolve the petty issue. The disagreement was typical for the industry, centered on a minor condiment error that should have been solved with a simple apology or a handful of packets. However, the atmosphere shifted as the verbal back and forth continued. Despite not being the employee involved in the dispute, Elijah Mackey was listening from his station at the drive-thru, his frustration building as he monitored the interaction occurring just a few feet away. As Wesley Robertson continued to demand his mayonnaise packets at the front window, Elijah Mackey made a decision that would change their lives forever. Instead of staying at his post or walking through the door to assist his coworker, Mackey chose a more aggressive path. He climbed through the drive-thru window and dropped to the pavement, walking around the building to confront Robertson directly. The two men engaged in a brief but heated verbal argument in the parking lot. Witnesses reported that Robertson may have used a derogatory term during the exchange, which served as the final trigger for Mackey. Without warning, Mackey reached into his waistband and pulled out a small handgun. He leveled the weapon at Robertson's chest and fired a single shot at point-blank range. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the busy tourist area, and Robertson collapsed to the ground instantly. Rather than offering aid or waiting for authorities, Mackey turned and fled on foot, disappearing into the shadows of the nearby hotels. The triviality of the dispute stood in haunting contrast to the sudden, violent finality of the act that had just occurred.
Osceola County deputies arrived at the Checkers within minutes, finding a scene of chaos and a dying man on the pavement. Paramedics rushed Wesley Robertson to the Osceola Regional Medical Center, but despite their best efforts, the trauma to his chest was too severe, and he was pronounced dead that same night. Meanwhile, law enforcement established a perimeter around the restaurant and the adjacent Celebration Suites hotel. Using witness descriptions of the employee who had jumped through the window, they began a tactical sweep of the area. It didn't take long to locate the suspect. Elijah Mackey was found hiding under a stairwell at the hotel next door, trembling and still in possession of the firearm used in the shooting. When deputies detained him, Mackey's demeanor shifted from aggression to apparent concern. He reportedly asked the officers if Robertson was going to be okay. This moment of realization came far too late, as the weapon he carried and the path he had chosen had already sealed his fate. He was taken into custody without further incident, the mayonnaise murder becoming the center of a massive local investigation.
On May 22, 2025, the day after the shooting, detectives officially charged Elijah Mackey with first-degree premeditated murder.
During his initial court appearance, the details of the mayonnaise packet motive were presented, leaving the judge and the public in a state of disbelief. Because of the nature of the crime and the evidence provided by witnesses and surveillance footage, Mackey was denied bond and remanded to the Osceola County Jail. In November 2025, after 6 months of legal maneuvering, Mackey entered a plea of not guilty, setting the stage for a high-stakes trial. His defense team began the difficult task of explaining how a dispute over condiments could lead to a premeditated killing, while prosecutors focused on the fact that Mackey had to climb through a window and arm himself to carry out the attack. The legal proceedings highlighted a disturbing trend of service workers carrying concealed weapons to work, a violation of company policy that turned a minor workplace grievance into a capital case. Mackey sat in his cell, a 23-year-old with his entire life ahead of him, now facing the possibility of life in prison. The death of Wesley Robertson left a void in his family and a chilling mark on the Kissimmee community. Checkers corporate headquarters released a statement expressing their shock and sadness, emphasizing that Mackey's violent actions were a complete deviation from the values of their thousands of employees. The case became a national headline, used as a cautionary tale about the intersection of hair-trigger tempers and the easy accessibility of firearms. For the Robertson family, there was no logic that could explain why a human life was worth less than a few packets of mayonnaise. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the fast food violence epidemic, where the most mundane interactions are now fraught with the potential for lethal escalation. Wesley Robertson went out for a late-night meal and never returned home, his life ended by a man who wasn't even part of his original order. Elijah Mackey remains behind bars, a haunting example of how a single moment of rage over a triviality can destroy multiple lives and leave a legacy of senseless blood. The mayonnaise packets were never found, but the damage they caused remains permanent.
New tonight, guilty. That is the verdict in the trial of Kelvis Rodriguez, who investigators say shot and killed DJ Joshua in August of 2020. Joshua was a Burger King worker. It happened after Rodriguez's girlfriend was upset that the drive-thru line was
The night of August 1st, 2020, at a Burger King in Orlando, Florida, began with a frustrated customer in a long line. Ashley Mason was sitting in her black sedan with her 13-year-old daughter, growing increasingly irate at the wait time. Instead of waiting patiently, Mason jumped out of her car, marched to the drive-thru window, and began screaming at the staff, banging on the glass. One of the employees, 22-year-old Desmond Joshua, had only been on the job for 2 days. In an attempt to de-escalate the situation, Joshua refunded Mason $40 and asked her to leave. Mason's daughter threw a drink at the window, and as they drove off, Mason shouted a chilling threat. Her man was coming down there to handle it. She didn't go home. She pulled into a nearby parking lot and made a phone call to her boyfriend, 37-year-old Kelvis Rodriguez Torres. Within minutes, a white work truck pulled into the parking lot, and the minor frustration of a slow drive-thru line transformed into a coordinated mission for violent retribution. Kelvis Rodriguez Torres arrived at the Burger King looking for a fight. He ignored the manager and went straight for Desmond Joshua in the parking lot. Torres, a convicted felon who was legally prohibited from owning a firearm, immediately attacked the young worker, putting him in a physical headlock and attempting to choke him. A brave bystander intervened, successfully pulling Torres off the 22-year-old. This should have been the moment where the violence stopped, but Ashley Mason, who had returned to the scene, was now standing by her car, pointing a handgun at the crowd. As Torres walked back toward his white truck, he wasn't looking to leave, he was looking for a weapon. He looked at Mason and demanded, "Give me the fire." Mason handed him the gun. Torres sat in the driver's seat of his truck, lowered the window, and locked eyes with Desmond Joshua. He delivered a terrifying, cold-blooded countdown. "You got 2 seconds. Before Joshua could even react, Torres pulled the trigger, firing a single shot directly into the young man's chest. After the shot rang out, both Torres and Mason sped away in their separate vehicles, leaving Desmond Joshua to die in the parking lot. Joshua was rushed to the hospital, but he succumbed to his injuries shortly after arrival. His life ended on just his second day of work. The Orange County Sheriff's deputies quickly identified the white work truck and tracked down Torres the following morning. During his interrogation, Torres made a startling admission. He confessed to the shooting, but told investigators he had already taken care of the weapon. He claimed he had completely dismantled the handgun and disposed of the pieces in a way that ensured they would never be recovered. While the gun was never found, his admission of destroying it became a critical piece of evidence. He was charged with first-degree murder, destruction of evidence, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. 3 days later, Ashley Mason was also arrested and charged as a principal to the murder, as surveillance footage proved she had provided the weapon and waited for the confrontation to occur.
The legal battle for justice for Desmond Joshua lasted over 3 years. In November 2023, the case finally went to trial in an Orange County courtroom. Prosecutors argued that the killing was a premeditated execution, citing the 2-second warning as proof of Torres's intent to kill. However, the defense focused on the chaotic nature of the parking lot fight. After days of testimony and reviewing the surveillance footage from a nearby restaurant, the jury reached a surprising conclusion. While they found Torres guilty, they did not convict him of first-degree murder. Instead, they returned a verdict of guilty on the lesser charge of manslaughter with a firearm, along with the charges for tampering with evidence and being a felon in possession of a gun. Despite the manslaughter label, the gravity of the crime, taking a life over a $40 refund and a long wait, remained a central theme. The victim's family sat in the gallery, watching as the man who murdered their son over fast food finally faced the legal consequences of his 2-second decision.
Well, the crime made national headlines, a fatal stabbing at a Popeyes restaurant in Prince George's County. After 10 days, the suspect in that attack is now in custody.
In the fall of 2019, America was gripped by a cultural phenomenon, the release of the Popeyes chicken sandwich. People were driving for hours and standing in massive lines just to get a taste of the viral menu item. On the evening of November 4th, 2019, the Popeyes on Livingston Road in Oxon Hill, Maryland was packed with customers who had been waiting for the sandwich's re-release. Among them was 30-year-old Rico McLean, who had come to the restaurant with his wife and children for a family meal. The atmosphere was tense, fueled by the long wait and the high demand. The routine of the evening was shattered when 28-year-old Kevin Tyrell Davis walked into the restaurant and did the unthinkable in a room full of hungry, tired people. He cut straight to the front of the line. Davis bypassed dozens of customers, including McLean and his young children, sparking immediate outrage. Words were exchanged, and what started as a simple social transgression quickly escalated into a heated verbal confrontation that threatened to boil over inside the crowded lobby.
The argument between Rico McLean and Kevin Davis didn't stay inside the Popeyes. For reasons that still haunt the witnesses of that night, both men stepped out of the restaurant and into the dark parking lot. What happened next was a blur of violence that lasted only 15 seconds. In the heat of the moment, McLean produced a knife. Before the surrounding crowd could intervene or realize the severity of the shift, McLean lunged at Davis, stabbing him once in the upper body. The strike was singular but surgical in its lethality. As Davis collapsed to the pavement, McLean didn't stay to see the consequences of his actions. He turned and fled the scene, leaving his own family behind in the chaos. When police arrived minutes later, they found Davis bleeding out on the asphalt. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, but the damage was done. Within an hour of trying to skip a line for a chicken sandwich, Kevin Tyrell Davis was pronounced dead, leaving a community to grapple with the terrifying speed at which life can be taken.
The Prince George's County Police Department immediately launched a manhunt for the Popeyes stabber.
Surveillance footage from inside the restaurant had captured McLean's face clearly, along with the interaction leading up to the murder. For 10 days, McLean remained on the run, hiding from the authorities, while his image was broadcast across national news. Detectives utilized community tips and digital forensics to narrow down his location. On November 14, 2019, the search ended at a home on Nova Avenue in Capitol Heights, Maryland. Special operations units surrounded the house, and Rico McLean was taken into custody without further incident. The arrest brought a temporary sense of relief to a public terrified by the chicken sandwich violence, but it was only the beginning of a long legal journey. A grand jury soon indicted McLean on charges of first-degree murder and carrying a dangerous weapon with intent to injure. The man who had gone out for a viral sandwich was now facing the rest of his life in a prison cell. The legal process moved slowly, delayed further by the global pandemic. It took nearly 2.5 years for Rico McLean to stand trial. During the proceedings in April 2022, McLean's defense team argued that the incident was a tragic escalation rather than a calculated execution. However, the prosecution focused on the fact that McLean had brought a knife to a verbal dispute and chose to use it in a parking lot rather than walking away. The jury deliberated on the gravity of the 15-second encounter and ultimately returned a verdict of second-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing in September 2022, the court heard emotional testimony from both sides. The prosecution asked for a 35-year sentence to reflect the loss of life. In a surprising turn, McLean stood up and offered a sincere apology to the Davis family. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in prison, with no portion of the sentence suspended. The reality of the verdict was clear. A single moment of rage had resulted in 2 decades of lost freedom and 1 permanent loss of life. In the early hours of September 13, 2024, the Waffle House in Laurinburg, North Carolina, was operating on its usual overnight rhythm. Behind the grill was 19-year-old Jalen Madden, working alongside her 18-year-old boyfriend, Burley Dawson McClure III, who had recently graduated high school. Around 12:30 a.m., 38-year-old Flora Carlin Lozano, known by the nickname Chulo, walked in and placed an order. The restaurant was busy, and Jalen informed the customers that there would be a 15 to 20-minute wait for food. Lozano, however, was in no mood for patience. He grew increasingly agitated, repeatedly coming to the service window to complain about the delay. He specifically targeted the staff with verbal abuse, stating that it shouldn't take that long to cook bacon. Despite the hostility, Jalen remained professional and eventually completed his order. Lozano took his food and walked toward the exit, appearing to leave the situation behind. The staff breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the confrontation was over and they could return to their shift in peace. The relief felt by the Waffle House employees was tragically short-lived. After walking toward his Chevrolet in the parking lot with his food in hand, Lozano did not drive away. Instead, he stopped and turned back toward the glass front of the restaurant. Fueled by a lingering, irrational resentment over the cooking time of his breakfast, he pulled out a handgun. Lozano fired 2 shots directly into the occupied building. One of those bullets shattered the glass and struck 18-year-old Burley Dawson McClure III as he stood inside the restaurant. The sound of the gunfire sent customers and staff diving for cover. Lozano immediately fled the scene on foot, disappearing into the darkness of Scotland Crossing Drive. Inside, the restaurant was a scene of horror as Jalen realized her boyfriend had been hit. Police arrived within 12 minutes, finding Burley in critical condition. He was rushed to Scotland Memorial Hospital, but he did not survive the night. A life had been taken because a customer refused to wait 20 minutes for a side of bacon. The Laurinburg Police Department quickly identified Flora Carlin Lozano as the shooter and issued a warrant for first-degree murder. Recognizing him as a career floater with ties to South Carolina and Florida, investigators labeled him armed and dangerous and alerted authorities across state lines. For 4 months, Lozano managed to evade capture, moving through different jurisdictions to stay ahead of the law. Back in Laurinburg, the community mourned Dawson, a young man known for his bright smile and work ethic. His family waited in agony as the search stretched into the winter of 2025. Finally, in January 2025, a tip led U.S. Marshals and local police to Portsmouth, Virginia. Lozano was located and taken into custody without incident, ending a multi-state manhunt. The process of extradition began, bringing the Bacon Killer back to North Carolina to face the consequences of his impulsive violence. The legal system was now ready to address a crime that had shocked the region with its sheer pointlessness.
By April 2025, Lozano was back in Scotland County and booked into the detention center without bond. As prosecutors reviewed the case, the details became even more damning. It was discovered that Lozano was a convicted felon, meaning he was legally prohibited from possessing the firearm he used to kill Burley. He was formally indicted on charges of first-degree murder, possession of a firearm by a felon, and discharging a weapon into an occupied property. In December 2025, the legal stakes were raised to the highest possible level. District Attorney Jamie Adams filed a formal notice that the state of North Carolina would be seeking the death penalty against Flora Carlin Lozano. The decision was based on the aggravating factors of the case, specifically the random and high-risk nature of shooting into a public business. Lozano was assigned a second specialized attorney, as required by law for capital cases, and the reality of a potential execution began to loom over his legal proceedings.
On the evening of July 8, 2024, the Church's Chicken on Park Avenue in Memphis was busy with the usual dinner rush. Monica Williams, a 45-year-old FedEx employee, pulled into the drive-thru with her friend and her friend's 10-year-old son. What was meant to be a simple meal run using coupons quickly devolved into a bitter dispute. At the intercom, Williams argued with 48-year-old employee Anitra West over payment and the specifics of her order. The tension followed Williams to the pickup window, where the verbal sparring with West became increasingly personal and loud. Williams eventually decided she no longer wanted the food and prepared to drive away, but not before delivering a chilling promise. West's friend, who was on the phone with her at the time, clearly heard Williams shout, "I will kill you." Williams sped out of the parking lot, and for a moment, the staff believed the danger had passed. West continued her shift, likely shaken, but unaware that the threat she had just received was a literal vow of violence.
After leaving the restaurant, Monica Williams did something that proved her rage was not a heat-of-the-moment flare-up, but a cold, calculated intent. She drove her friend and the 10-year-old child home, calmly telling them she was going back out to pick up some chips for their dinner. Instead, she drove her teal Mazda CX-9 back to the Church's Chicken parking lot. She didn't pull back into the drive-thru. She parked and waited in the shadows. Just before 9:16 p.m., Anitra West stepped outside the restaurant to get some fresh air. She was still on the phone with her friend when she spotted a familiar vehicle. In her final moments, West's friend heard her say, "Girl, this same girl with the purple hair I just got into it with just pulled back up." West's last recorded words were a defiant, "Go to jail then," followed immediately by a single gunshot. Williams had fired from her vehicle, striking West in the head before speeding away, leaving the mother of two to die on the asphalt over a coupon disagreement. The Memphis Police Department arrived at 9:16 p.m., but West was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. The investigation moved with lightning speed thanks to the restaurant's surveillance system. The cameras had captured a woman with distinct purple hair driving a teal compact SUV. Within hours of the police releasing the images on social media, the community responded. A woman contacted the police, identifying the suspect as her friend, Monica Williams. She informed detectives that Williams' Mazda was parked right outside her house. When police arrived to seize the vehicle, they discovered that Williams had already fled.
She had returned home briefly after the shooting, packed an overnight bag, and disappeared into the night. As detectives dug into her history, they found a violent past. In 2009, Williams had been convicted of stabbing a pregnant woman and was currently a convicted felon. This meant the gun she used to kill Anitra West was possessed illegally, adding more weight to the impending charges.
For 7 days, Monica Williams remained a fugitive, knowing that her face was being broadcast across every local news station. The pressure from the Memphis community and law enforcement was relentless. Finally, on July 15, 2024, Williams walked into a police station and turned herself in. She was immediately booked into the Shelby County Jail on charges of first-degree murder and being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. Following her arrest, FedEx confirmed that she had been terminated from her position. During her initial court appearances, her defense attorney suggested there might be details the affidavit didn't cover, but the evidence was overwhelming. A witness had heard the death threat, and surveillance video placed her teal Mazda at the scene of the execution. Williams was denied bond, with the district attorney vowing to keep her behind bars until her trial. She remained stoic in court, showing no remorse for the family of the woman she had hunted down over a fast food order.